Once again, another driving video, sorta. And this one's brought to you by Wawa Coffee, because I drink and I know stuff. Just got done watching, oh yeah, by the way, I'm in New Jersey. You can tell because they're putting up a big fight with coronavirus with road cones. And it seems to be pretty effective. So yeah. We're not really social distancing with the cars though, but I guess that's okay. Anywho, I just watched a video put out by Alyssa Clegg, whose channel is Toxic Threads. She talks about kind of what's going on today and compares it to the Chinese Revolution of the 40s, but was actually going on long before then. And so that got my little gears in my mind working, and I worked a long time ago. I got a phone call from a guy, obvious Chinese descent, obvious Chinese accent, broken English. Asked me to do some work for him. So I did it. We became good friends. We talk about, you know, where America came from, where China came from. He eventually got his citizenship. Haven't spoken to him in a while, but if he called me right now and needed a ride from the airport to go do something, I'd turn around and do it. We're still good friends. I don't know what this guy's doing. That's okay. His grandfather was a reporter. He reported for different publications, not just domestic Chinese. And he knew all the major players. And when Mao Zedong kind of took over and started cleaning house, he figured it might be a good idea to get the hell out, and went to Taiwan, where my friend Dave and his family grew up. But the guy that's not really talked about is Chiang Kai-shek, and he was the democratically elected leader of China. Hong Kong had been a British colony for quite some time by the time World War II rolled around. But Chiang Kai-shek was democratically elected, but it was the absolute worst example of a democracy. In order to raise an army, if you want to be a general, you would get 4 or 5 of your thug buddies and you would start kidnapping military-age guys. And when you'd have a few hundred of them, then you would say, hey, I'm a captain and I have an army. And then you would get paid through the United States to arm your soldiers and feed them. And then you would take your army of captives and you would set them out in the woods, and basically, if you guys want rank, you're going to help me kidnap more until you got to battalion strength and make yourself a general, improve your lot in life. But the fact of the matter is, the value of life in China then, as in now, had very little value. So these kidnapped conscripts, they weren't really fed, they weren't armed, they weren't clothed, they weren't housed, they weren't anything. They would just drag them along and going village to village, you know, literally kidnapping people. And then they would get posted, you're gonna go into this ravine and you're gonna hold it against the Chinese. And the general would split his troops, and some would be on the high ground where they could retreat, and the not so physically fit guys would get put where the brunt of the attack would be. And as soon as the first shots would go off, they'd be history, and the guys in a spot where they could retreat would retreat. And it was great. It was a great money-making thing, except that it was totally ineffective against the Japanese. Roosevelt had people there since he became president in the 30s. had to fix the windows, getting a little buffering. And he had people that had been there whose families were merchants that dealt with China, that knew all the players, they knew the culture, they spoke the language. And little by little, between arming the Chinese National Army and working with people, and things were kind of turning around, very slowly, but slowly turning around. Meanwhile, there was a people's uprising going on long before World War II, and they did not see themselves as communists per se. They saw themselves as the oppressed masses, and Mao Zedong saw himself as George Washington, trying to unite his people through the taxes, through different national activities. A village might be going through, one province might have a famine, lack of rain, locust, whatever, and be starving, but their taxes had to be paid. Mao Zedong, they would basically go to the other province and say, hey, listen, these people are starving. Let us have some of your grains, your wheat, whatever, your rice, and bring it to them. And then when you're in the same situation in a few years, they'll return it. So he was building a network that way and becoming very popular. When the war broke out, he didn't conscript anybody. He asked for volunteers and he asked for supplies, and he got it. And they were actually effective in stopping the Japanese. But we had ties with the national government, with Chiang Kai-shek, even though our diplomats knew Mao Zedong and knew when the war's over, Mao Zedong's going to take over, and we're going to have another model of the United States. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Roosevelt died. Truman, who really had no foreign experience, except, you got to remember, the vice president at that time, his job was to replace the president if he died, and to break ties in the Senate, and that's all. He really didn't have a job except to be alive, and that was the case with Truman. So Truman pulled out Roosevelt's diplomats and basically anybody of any importance in charge, and replaced them with people that he kind of, owed political favors to. There was a guy from Oklahoma that became our ambassador, and he thought it was real funny to call Mao Zedong Moose Tongue. In China, making fun of somebody's name is a huge, huge insult. There's a thing called face that I will not get into right now, but when you shit on somebody's face, you made an enemy for life. Not understanding the politics, they armed the communists to the teeth, and Truman wanted to basically shut down Japan's operations before the invasion of Japan. So whoever could fight, we were going to arm. So we armed the hell out of the communists, even though we should not have. Because we had a balance of power, a very, very large, weak national army against a very small, well-trained, dedicated communist army, and they were pretty equal. So therefore, you had a peace between the two. Arm up one side, and all of a sudden, one side has an advantage, and you're going to have a problem later that's not going to be workable. So anyway, Japan is contained in China. The bombs are dropped on Japan. The war is over. There's 100,000 whatever troops of Japanese army, and what do? You probably should not. You should probably just bring the Japanese troops home, just get them out of there. But that's not what they did. The Japanese army, which terrorized people in China, treated them like dirt. Two generals in a drinking match got in an argument of whose army was capable of killing more people in a day, and the result was a melee massacre where they were told not to use bullets because they didn't have that many bullets. Just use your, use your bayonets, use your knives, use your fists. So the end result was, 150,000 Chinese killed in one day just for sport. And that wasn't really, that was the extreme, but that wasn't really isolated. Brutalities and crimes against humanity were an everyday occurrence throughout wherever the Japanese were in China. They happened every day. So what do you do with these guys? Well, Truman's plan: make them the police force. The people that just got defeated, that just got turned in their weapons, give them arms, spread them out over the country, and let them do it again. And that's what they did. But you also had a very well-armed communist army now, very well-armed, very dedicated, started fighting with the police, eradicating the Japanese police force, and that had to be stopped. So the nationalist army, was mobilized to fight the communist army. To make matters worse, not understanding why people were fighting for what, we became the Air Force for the National Chinese Army. We were shipping troops around. The Chinese nationalists and the Japanese army were fighting the communists. And, it was a total disaster. It was just compounding error on top of error on top of error on top of error. It got to the point where we pulled out, and because we weren't supposed to take part in the Civil War because of the newly formed United Nations that Truman set up. And at that point, it took 6-8 months for the communists to wipe out and remove the nationalists. Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, and that has been the contention of the communist Chinese ever since, that Taiwan is a runaway province and should not be recognized as an independent country. But and because of our actions in creating the problem, the communist Chinese wanted nothing to do with us, and the whole American dream and the George Washington, that all went up in smoke. Mao Zedong, without anybody to keep him in check, without any opposition party, turned into a monster. Subsequent rulers built on that, and we have the China we have today. The brutalities under the Red Chinese government have been incalculable. From removing identities, from starving villages, to taxing villagers, all the food that they grew for a year, making, in the recovery after the social revolution, people were happy to live in a slave camp making sneakers or widgets or whatever the hell, because at least they knew they had a roof over their head and they got fed every day. And that was a huge improvement over what they had. And Alicia, the video that on Toxic Threads, I suggest you check it out. It touches on that, but it touches more on where we are today and how the system is being crumbled in order to make it happen. And it's a very good parallel, very good video. Alyssa always puts out great material, always worth watching. Whenever she puts something up, I make it a point to watch it, because it's always, just like this one. Watched it and just gives you something to think about for a while until you get the chance to open your mouth. This is running way too long, and I hope you all have a great day.